Hey guys, what's happening? So now we have yet another matchup between Black Panther and Deadpool. And it's one of those things that if someone has never heard of these two fighting before, or if it's someone who's never heard of a matchup between these two, whether it was T'Challa versus Deadpool or Killmonger when he was Black Panther versus Deadpool, like in your mind, in either case, if you're like me, your first thought would be like, but why? And it's not that I don't want to see it, but it's like, I want to know why, because you already know it's going to be a good fight, but you want to know also if it's going to be a good story. So let's talk about that for a little bit. And if you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe so you catch the spills every week, and don't forget to hit that bell up top so we can squad up in the comments for the first hour. Alright, so first things first, a while back I did a video about different fights between Black Panther and Deadpool, like back when Killmonger was the Black Panther and Deadpool was hired to kidnap his leopard prey. And I'll never forget, in that video I had this wild theory, and this is like back when the Black Panther trailers were just teasers, and all we saw was just Black Panther flying into Wakanda, and I was like, Killmonger's gonna become Black Panther. Nobody paid it no attention. And the only thing my theory was standing on was a couple glimpses of the Warrior Falls. That's it, and nobody listened. But either way, I just thought about that, had to bring that back up. But aside from Killmonger, you also had when he faced T'Challa, back when he broke into the Triskelion to see Ulysses Kane, because Ulysses Kane can have visions of the future, but only if it's something catastrophic or if his life is threatened. So for that reason, Deadpool had to sneak in like he was gonna kill him, and he runs into a member of the Ultimates, which is T'Challa, the Black Panther. And these two had one of the dirtiest throwdowns that I've ever seen. And I couldn't help but to think, like, when Deadpool hit him with the top of that toilet, he was just sitting on that with his pants down. Like, could you imagine if the Black Panther had a mask like Batman's? Like, somebody would have died that day. But either way, I got a link in the description to a breakdown of both of those matchups, in case you need a refresher or what have you. But in this instance, just starting off with Deadpool, we're given a scenario that's a bit of a mixture of both. And it starts off with Deadpool, who's not on a job at this moment, but he finds himself in a confrontation with the Wrecker, who pretty much what he does is just as simple as his name. He's not really relevant to this story, or any story that he's in for that matter. But anyway, Deadpool finds himself in the middle of this because he's trying to save a school bus full of kids that happens to be in the Wrecker's path of destruction. And it's funny because he has a couple of kids just take the wheel, and one of them he's calling Timmy, and I'm pretty sure he meant that more in a South Park kind of way instead of Lassie, though it could have been both, because Wade's good with the double entendres like that. But Wade is able to stop the Wrecker by pretty much dropping his own ball on him, and he does this by using a thermal grenade just pretty much to melt the chain. But I love that when he does this, he straight up uses the old Darkwing Duck, let's get dangerous. And he's like, man, I've been waiting years to say that legally, which is like a shout out to Disney. But when this happens, it isn't long before he realizes that everybody is not okay. And of all people, the person who gets hurt is the mailman, Willie Lumpkin. Oh man, of all people. And Willie Lumpkin is a very special character in Marvel Comics, and I went more in depth about why in my Stan Lee tribute, but for right now, let's just say that he's one of those guys we just need around in the comics. We just need him to be okay, and I'm just gonna leave that right there. But because of this incident, Willie has a piece of debris stuck in his chest, and Deadpool only gets to speak to the doctor because he tells her that he's his son, Deadpool Lumpkin. And his doctor's like, every time he breathes, it gets closer to his heart. That piece of metal gets closer to his heart. And so at this point, Deadpool's like, I gotta do anything I can to save this guy. And the doctor lets him know that there is a possibility, a way to save him, which is very similar to how Iron Man had cured himself, and the process is called vibranium therapy. And you don't need a lot of vibranium, just like an inch of it. And at that point, Deadpool's like, say no more, I know exactly where to go to get it. Which brings us over to Wakanda, which as you know has more than just an inch of vibranium. And when you get into your history of Wakanda, vibranium is something that is very sacred to them because it is a gift from the gods. And vibranium crashing to the earth is what created the heart-shaped herb, it's the strength of the Black Panther. Its rare molecular contents have allowed Wakanda to experiment with it and become more advanced than any other nation on the planet. And for many years, that's been the cornerstone of Wakanda's religion, their wealth, and their advantage over the rest of the world. And because of this vibranium, that's given them access to knowledge, a direct connection to Bast, a direct connection to their ancestors. It's provided the herb that has strengthened the Black Panther. For this reason, this mineral is more sacred than something that you would just trade or give away, because its value to the Wakandan people is beyond money. And prior to King T'Chaka, who sold small amounts of it to fund education to further advance Wakanda and expand upon the techno-organic jungle which was built by his father Azuri, prior to that, the people of Wakanda had taken much pride in not accepting gifts, nor giving anything from Wakanda to the rest of the world. Not their vibranium, not their land, not 1 inch. Which for centuries has pretty much been the pride and the law of the land. And so now around this time in Wakanda, you have Ubosuku Bokufa, which translates to the Night of the Dead. And it's celebrated because this is when the veil between life and death is the thinnest in Wakanda. And it's really pretty much Halloween in Wakanda. And when I see these kids' costumes, I can't help but think of King Vader on Instagram. And I think it's that red glow that just triggered that memory. But speaking of triggering memories, it's walking through here where T'Challa and Shuri, they're having a conversation about Ubosuku Bokufa, and they remember a time when Shuri had died and came back. And it's pretty much this conversation that leads them away from the crowd and back to the lab to work on more weapons development. And when they get there, one of the weapons that they happen to be working on is one of their latest developments, which is a gun that uses artificial photosynthetic bio nanites, which pretty much is a huge laser gun that heals as it cuts. And because of that, T'Challa even pitches the idea of miniaturizing it and using it like a scalpel to even perform safer surgeries, because it reduces the possibility of infection tremendously. But at this point, the gun is still a prototype and it's something that's still in development. But while they're here testing it, they have an announcement from Okoye, who lets them know that they have a situation, because Deadpool has snuck into Wakanda. And before you guys lose it, we'll get to that in just a little bit. But Deadpool snuck his way into Wakanda to where he's brought before the king. And of course, when he's there, his first words already get him off on the wrong foot, because he greets the king saying, "Hakuna Matata, your majesty." And Shuri's like, that is the worst thing you could have just said. But when T'Challa asks him how did he get into Wakanda, this is where it gets interesting, because the way Deadpool explains it, all he did was disguised himself as an elephant and stole away with some elephants who were being sent back to Wakanda. And I'm talking about he's disguised as an elephant making the moo noise. Elephants don't make that noise, but it got him in. But he even went on to explain it was like a 13-hour flight, and during that flight some of the elephants were trying to get a little frisky, and at that point T'Challa's like, spare me the details, because that's the last mental picture any of us want to have. But when they get down to the details of why Deadpool is here and him needing just a small piece of vibranium, and not even going into the detail of what he needs it for, he just says, I need a small piece of vibranium, T'Challa goes to the assumption that he's going to make a bullet out of it. And I don't necessarily blame him, because it's Deadpool we're talking about here. But without telling him anything else, T'Challa just tells him no. And for Deadpool, he just gets straight to the point. He's like, you know what, let's not do this back and forth where you keep saying no and then we end up fighting and then some bigger threat comes around, then we got to team up, because there's really no time for all that. Because you got to keep in mind, with Willie Lumpkin, every breath that he takes, that shard gets closer and closer to his heart. So due to not having so much time to explain everything, Deadpool just goes full hostile. And he probably could have just been like, Willie Lumpkin, and T'Challa would have been like, why did you say that name? And everything could have been resolved like right there. But no, Deadpool acts before he thinks, per usual, and they get to throwing down. And when this happens, T'Challa orders his guards in the door to step away, because he doesn't want any Wakandan blood being shed with Deadpool wilding out like this. So instead, what T'Challa does is he gets them to back down, and he gets Shuri to throw a distraction so he can grab their new test weapon and blast Deadpool's arm off. But not with the intention of killing him, but actually a few other reasons. 1, to test the weapon. 2, as a bit of a warning shot, go figure. But also 3, to test T'Challa's theory of Deadpool's healing factor. And this is pretty interesting, because prior to this point, the origin of Deadpool's healing factor has come from the Weapon X program and them giving him a sample of Wolverine's DNA, which at the time was a solution to suppress the cancer within Wade Wilson, which then later started to fail. And when it started to fail, he was sent to a hospice where he was pretty much left to die. And because all these people were left here to die, Ajax, who was one of the assistants who worked there, pretty much placed bets on who would die first, and that's how he even got the name Deadpool. And why this is so interesting is like what we know up until now, like when Ajax ripped out Wade's heart, this supposedly kickstarted his healing factor, bringing him back from death, giving us the assumption that Wolverine's healing factor was coming back, and that's what's made him regenerate ever since. But when T'Challa shoots his arm off, he discovers that his theory was right, and everything that we've thought about Deadpool's healing factor has been wrong this whole time. And it's a little bit retconny, but it still makes sense in a number of ways, because the way that this gun works with the star cells, it heals as it cuts, and it only suppresses infection, or in this case, cancers. So when Deadpool feels the bio nanites keeping his body from regenerating, it's here that we find out that ever since his healing factor he got from Wolverine wore off, that this entire time, ever since, he has no longer had a healing factor, but his entire body has just been a regenerating cancer through and through. which is pretty crazy, but not too far-fetched. Let me know what you guys think about that down in the comments. But it's here when T'Challa lets Deadpool know that you don't have a healing factor, but on the contrary, you have a dying factor, because all this time your regeneration has just been an aggressive cancer growth, which once again is the reason why this weapon was able to stop Deadpool from regenerating. And after slowing Wade down, T'Challa's like, oh yeah, don't you have a teleporter on you? Which is funny because I was just talking about that last week, I think it was, in the Deadpool versus Bullseye video. And Deadpool's like, man, I haven't used that thing since 2012. I don't know. Actually 2013 if you count the games. But I'm pretty sure he just means the comics. But in the comics, 2012 sounds about right. And it's funny because T'Challa's like, what's the distance on that thing? And he hacks into it and teleports Deadpool outside of Wakanda. And without his arm, of course. Which, as a result of the star cells, will not be growing back anytime soon. And this is really just the end of round 1 between these two. Because not only is there a clock ticking for the precious Willie Lumpkin, but also at this point, Wade Wilson is pissed. But that'll do it for this one, guys. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments about this new discovery of Deadpool's power. Do you rather it the old way? Do you think that this way makes more sense? I want to know what you guys think, with Deadpool having a dying factor instead of a healing factor. But let me know your thoughts down in the comments, and we'll do it again in the next one. Alright, later.